But now you're left with the wreckage. A heart torn apart by people who smiled as they took. A mind bruised not by punches, but by silence, by disappointment, by a slow erosion. You're not foolish. You were trained. Trained to believe that sincerity ensures safety, that pure intentions prevent loss. Yet you lost. Why? Because you never learned the rule Machiavelli articulated 5 centuries ago. Men are driven not by goodness, but by necessity. They don't stay because they love you. They stay because it's convenient. They stay because you don't question, because your silence makes things easier. And once they've extracted all they can, they vanish quietly, without warning, without apology. They leave you to wonder if your kindness was a mistake, if your warmth was weakness, if perhaps, just maybe, you were too gentle for such a harsh world. Let me be clear, this isn't a video for those seeking comfort. This isn't another be your best self monologue. This is about war, a silent war, one you didn't even realize you were losing. This is for those who've been drained by being too available, too forgiving, too easy to reach, and even easier to read. If you've ever found yourself asking, why do the manipulators always win? Why do the good ones always end up bleeding? Why does giving everything get me nothing? Then stop right now and look again, not with the eyes of a dreamer, but through the mind of a strategist. Because here, we don't teach you how to be softer. We teach you how to be sharper, more dangerous, without ever raising your voice. It begins by unlearning the oldest lie you've ever swallowed, that goodness guarantees protection. It doesn't. What protects you is presence, perception, and power. Now ask yourself, are you ready to take it back? It doesn't bruise, it doesn't bleed, but it breaks something deep inside you, quietly. It's the kind of pain that doesn't scream because it was never allowed to. It whispers, it festers, it grows in silence. Because you were taught to call it strength. They look at you, calm, composed, reasonable, and assume you're untouched, untouchable. They see your patience and call it wisdom. They see your forgiveness and call it virtue. They see your stillness and assume you're at peace. But what they don't see, what they'll never see, is what it cost you to remain that still. Because the truth is, you've been touched more times than you dare to admit. Not by violence, but by erosion. By people who leaned on your empathy until they drained it. Who took your compassion as permission. Who mistook your loyalty for blindness. And the worst part, you let them. Not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. You believed they would change, that if you stayed soft, they'd eventually soften too. You thought kindness would protect you, that understanding would earn you peace, that if you just kept showing up, someone someday would show up for you. But no one did. And still you stayed, because that's what you were taught. Stay kind, stay good, stay available, even when it hurts, even when it kills you slowly. And so you shrunk. You quieted your needs. You became the easy one, the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the one who never asked for too much, the one who stayed even when no one noticed you were slipping. And the world, it applauded. They called you mature, wise beyond your years. But what they really meant was, you're convenient. You don't make us uncomfortable. They praised your endurance not because it was noble, but because it let them off the hook. And so you carried their pain and buried your own. You called it strength, but deep down, you knew something was dying. Because real strength isn't in being silent. It's in being clear. It's not in staying when it hurts, but knowing when to walk away. Machiavelli would have told you the truth. He'd say, if your silence keeps the peace but costs you your soul, it is not virtue, it is surrender. And how many times have you surrendered? Not in battle, but in the everyday betrayals of yourself. In the conversations where your truth sat burning on your tongue and you swallowed it. In the relationships where you knew the pattern but chose to stay predictable. And why? Because you were afraid of being too much. Afraid of the silence that might follow your boundaries. Afraid of looking like the villain in someone else's story. But let me ask you something. Who's been the villain in yours? Who benefited from the version of you that never fought back? Who rewrote your story by rewarding your compliance with temporary peace? Here's the bitter truth. You've been bleeding quietly and calling it strength. But bleeding is not strength. It's a signal, a warning, a red flag that you've ignored long enough. You think if you just keep enduring, it will get better. But endurance without recognition is not love, it's erasure. And you deserve more than being erased in someone else's comfort. So this is your permission to stop performing peace for people who thrive on your silence, to stop shrinking so others feel tall, to stop mistaking availability for virtue. Let them say you've changed. Let them call you distant, cold, unrecognizable. That's what people say when they lose access to the version of you that never said no. You are not their mirror anymore, not their comfort, not their emotional sponge. You are something else now, something heavier, sharper, quieter, but unbreakable. You are sovereign, and this is only the beginning. You thought it was your fault, that maybe you were just too trusting, too soft, too available, too much of something, and not enough of something else. But what if I told you it wasn't just you? What if I told you that this wasn't random, but engineered? You were conditioned to lose, not through violence, but through emotional architecture, a system that exploits the very traits you were praised for. Let's get something straight. You weren't born soft, you were trained to be. From the moment you could speak, you were rewarded for being agreeable, for smiling when it hurt, for staying quiet when something felt wrong, for saying yes when every cell in your body screamed no. And every time you complied, you were told, "Good job. That's maturity. That's how you get along." What they were really saying was, that's how you make yourself easy to manage. You were programmed to believe that comfort equals connection, that pleasing others means you'll be protected, that being liked is safer than being respected. And so your nervous system adapted. It memorized a rule no one said out loud: don't make things difficult. So now you flinch at confrontation. You apologize for your tone, even when you didn't say anything wrong. You explain yourself again and again, hoping to be understood. That's not personality, that's programming. And the world, it doesn't just tolerate that programming, it feeds on it. Look around. We glorify self-sacrifice. We romanticize being the bigger person. We praise those who give endlessly and abandon them the moment they need something back. You think they love your goodness, but what they love is your predictability. Because here's what Machiavelli knew long before modern psychology gave it a name. He who reveals his intentions has already surrendered. In other words, transparency is currency, and you've been giving it away cheaply. Every time you explain your pain, hoping for compassion. Every time you justify your standards to avoid being called difficult. Every time you tell someone where you're going emotionally, you're giving them a map. And maps are for people who want to find you, but also for people who want to corner you. Not everyone who mirrors your feelings is trying to connect. Some are trying to read, to measure, to plan. Because if they can predict you, they can move you. And if they can move you, they can use you. This is not always malicious. Sometimes it's subconscious. People gravitate toward what they can control, even if they call it love. And when they've learned your pattern, they test it. They push, they pull, they vanish and reappear, just enough to keep you guessing. And the worst part, you stay. You stay because you want to believe it's real, because you were taught to see the good, even while being drained by the bad. But here's what no one ever told you. Clarity is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal, and being unreadable is protection. You've spent years trying to be understood. Now it's time to become unpredictable. Not to deceive, but to defend. Because when no one can read you, no one can script you, no one can bait you, no one can play a game you didn't agree to play. This is the hidden machinery behind your suffering. You were trained to believe that vulnerability is always connection, but in the wrong hands, vulnerability is leverage. So what now? You unplug the machine. You stop narrating your healing. You stop giving people the user manual to your heart. You stop believing that exposure equals intimacy. You move with intent. You speak with restraint. You become unreadable. Not because you're hiding, but because you finally stopped leaking power. Machiavelli didn't advocate cruelty. He advocated control, presence, mystery, strategic silence. Because true power isn't about how loudly you speak, it's about how carefully you are listened to, even when you say nothing. So let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them say you've changed. They're right. Because now you're no longer a pattern. You're no longer a map. You're a storm, shifting, silent, and sovereign. Let's start with the truth no one dares to admit. You were trained to betray yourself, not once, but slowly, incrementally, so subtly that it never looked like betrayal. It looked like love, like loyalty, like being the better person, but it wasn't. It was erosion. You apologized for your needs. You stayed silent to keep the peace. You made yourself smaller so others could feel safe. And you called it maturity, wisdom, patience. But deep down, something didn't feel right, did it? You kept giving and losing, kept loving and aching, kept showing up and becoming invisible in the process. And the world, it clapped for you. It praised you for being understanding, for staying after the apology that never came, for being low maintenance, easy to love, resilient. But what it was really saying was that your pain was convenient, that your boundaries were negotiable, that your silence was useful. And while you wore the mask of strength, inside you were folding. So let's pull off the mask. Let's break down the three most destructive mistakes you keep making in the name of being good. Because Machiavelli didn't warn against cruelty, he warned against naivete. The first mistake, mistaking niceness for strategy. You think being nice keeps you safe? That if you're pleasant, soft-spoken, agreeable, people will treat you with care. But niceness without discernment is not kindness. It's self-neglect. They don't respect your tone, they respect your limits, and no one respects what they can access at will. You've been taught to be likable. Now it's time to be unmanipulable. Let your presence be warm, but your availability, that should be earned. The second mistake, oversharing as a form of bonding. You equate openness with connection, that if you pour out your story, your wounds, your thoughts, they'll understand, they'll protect, they'll stay. But oversharing too soon isn't intimacy. It's vulnerability without filtration. And what happens when you give someone your full internal map before they have earned the right to hold it? They memorize it, not to navigate you, but to control you. Machiavelli would call it a fatal error. He who exposes his plans gives his enemies the knife. So next time you feel the urge to explain everything, don't. Let silence speak for you. Let mystery shield you. The third mistake, thinking endurance equals loyalty. You've been praised for how long you stay, how much you tolerate, how many chances you give. But staying when nothing changes isn't love. It's self-erasure. You've convinced yourself that your pain proves your devotion, that if you keep absorbing disappointment, eventually it will stop. But it won't. It only escalates. Because people don't change when you endure them. They change when they fear losing you. If your loyalty has no line, they'll never stop crossing it. Endurance without reciprocity isn't noble. It's submission. So where did you learn all this? Who taught you that good means silent, that conflict is betrayal, that saying no makes you cold, that emotional starvation is just part of love? Who shaped you into someone who bleeds quietly and then applauds yourself for not screaming? It doesn't matter who. What matters is this. You are not required to continue the cycle. You are not here to be the strong one if that strength is killing you. Machiavelli once wrote, "Never do your enemy a small injury. If you strike, strike with finality." In psychological terms, stop making your boundaries polite. Stop forgiving without consequence. Stop teaching people that harming you is reversible. Because here's what they're learning from your tolerance. That your pain is not urgent, that your soul is negotiable, that your silence is approval. So they escalate. They push further. Not always out of malice, but because you trained them to. You normalize your own suffering. You disguise survival as virtue. You called self-betrayal emotional intelligence. But enough. It's time to stop mislabeling dysfunction as devotion, to stop shrinking in the name of peace, to stop performing stability while your identity rots underneath it. Because here's the Machiavellian truth no one taught you. Power is never forgettable. But nice disappears the moment it's no longer useful. So become unforgettable. Not by being louder, but by being less accessible, by being less explainable, by being less easy to reach without consequence. This isn't about being cruel, it's about being clear, and clarity is the beginning of power. They told you to be a good person, to be kind, to be forgiving, to give people the benefit of the doubt. And you tried, God knows you did. You forgave what broke you. You softened your voice for people who raised theirs. You stayed long after the warmth was gone, hoping goodness would be enough. But here's what they didn't tell you. The world isn't ruled by the good. It's ruled by the aware, the strategic, the ones who can read the room without needing to explain themselves to it. This is where Machiavelli enters, not as a villain, but as the voice of brutal clarity, the whisper in the storm that no one wanted you to hear. Because he didn't write for the idealists. He wrote for those ready to outgrow illusions, for those brave enough to admit the world is not fair, and waiting for fairness is a strategy for staying powerless. You've heard his quote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." And you were taught to reject it, to recoil, to label it dark, manipulative, wrong. But you misunderstood him. He wasn't telling you to be cruel. He was telling you to be felt, to be non-negotiable, to develop a presence so defined that people pause before crossing you. Because people don't respond to how kind you are. They respond to how clear you are, to how unreadable you are, to how much weight your silence carries. You thought moral purity would protect you, but Machiavelli understood. Appearances shape reality, perception governs behavior. Truth means nothing if no one looks long enough to find it. That's why people respect confidence over compassion. That's why they fear stillness more than kindness. Because stillness is unreadable, and unreadable is untouchable. Nietzsche knew it too. He said, "You have your way, I have mine." As for the right way, it does not exist. Because he saw what most don't. Morality isn't fixed. It bends with power. And when you don't question its frame, you become a tool of it. The good man isn't rewarded. He's expected, used, forgotten. And Carl Jung, he took it deeper. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what's been happening to you. You've called it bad luck, misfortune, fate. But really it was obedience, it was unconscious surrender. Because you thought being predictable made you noble. But no one told you predictability is a weapon. And when people know how you'll respond, they stop respecting your presence and start leveraging it. They don't push because they're cruel. They push because you've trained them to. Because your empathy became a tool of delay. Because your patience became a script. And while you were explaining your truth, they were moving the goalposts. While you were waiting to be seen, they were rewriting the rules, all in silence, all behind that smile you trusted. This is not about becoming cold, it's about becoming aware. Because Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in manipulation, it was in understanding human nature. When power enters the room, he saw it clearly. People rarely do what is right, they do what they can get away with. So if they got away with using you, it's not always because they're evil. It's because you allowed the frame where you over-explained, overgave, overweighted, the frame where your suffering had no cost, where your boundaries were just suggestions. And let's be honest, no one walks away from a system that benefits them. Not without pain, not without confrontation, not without clarity. You want peace? Then stop begging for it. Enforce it. Own the terms. Because morality that costs you your sovereignty is not virtue. It's slow suicide. And the person who walks through life without controlling their frame is not living. They're being written by everyone else. So this is your turning point. Not to harden, not to hurt, but to see. To outgrow the illusion that being lovable protects you. It doesn't. What protects you is being unreadable, is being felt even in silence, is being a presence that shifts the room without apology. Because the new morality is not about making everyone comfortable. It's about no longer betraying yourself to be digestible. You weren't born to be managed. You were born to be unmovable. Transformation doesn't begin when you learn something new. It begins when you unlearn what was never true. You've spent years trying to become more lovable, more agreeable, more tolerable, more manageable. You silence your truth to be palatable. You shaved down your edges to avoid friction. You smiled through confusion, hoping they'd see your goodness and finally stay. But here's the truth. The ones who needed you smaller were never going to love you whole. They only loved the version of you that didn't threaten their illusion, the version that didn't speak too loudly, want too deeply, or see too clearly. So you buried the real you, the intense you, the passionate you, the version that spoke with conviction and walked with certainty. Not to heal, but to survive. But what if I told you the very part you buried is your source of power? Not the power to control others, but the power to no longer need permission to exist. That's the shift. You stop asking, will they still love me if I say this? And you start asking, will I still love myself if I stay silent? Because power isn't about dominance, it's about clarity. And clarity feels dangerous to people who benefit from your confusion. They liked you better when you doubted yourself, when your guilt made you compliant, when your kindness was unconditional, even when they gave you conditions. But now you're not explaining every thought. You're not shrinking your truth into something digestible. You're not softening your fire just to keep the peace. And they feel it. They feel the stillness in you, the unreadable silence, the sharpness of your presence. They say you've changed, and you have, because you've stopped bleeding just to keep them warm. This isn't about bitterness, it's about boundary. No more overthinking every message. No more editing your words to avoid discomfort. No more guilt when your no is the answer that saves you. Machiavelli didn't say to destroy others. He said to avoid being destroyed by them. And for too long, you've been participating in a slow, smiling form of self-destruction. But now you pause before you reply. You calculate before you commit. You observe before you offer access. Because your presence is no longer free. Your energy is no longer a donation. Your silence is no longer a blank check for others to cash. You don't owe anyone your availability. You don't owe comfort to those who devalue your depth. And you don't apologize for this shift. You honor it. Because this isn't arrogance. It's self-possession. This isn't detachment. It's selective access. And yes, it will feel strange at first. The stillness, the distance, the shedding of old identities. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself, to clarify that you're still a good person, to reassure them that you haven't changed too much. But don't, because goodness without boundaries is not love, it's self-abandonment. And you're done with that. You're done pretending you're fine just to avoid confrontation. You're done shrinking so no one feels insecure in your presence. You're done proving yourself to people who were only ever trying to disarm you. You are not here to be easy. You are here to be true. True to your pace, true to your intuition, true to the version of you that doesn't bend when pressured but sharpens. Let them call it ego. Let them call it distant. Let them say you've lost your warmth. They're not wrong. You've simply stopped setting yourself on fire just to keep others comfortable. And when you stop burning, you start seeing, you start building, you start choosing, you start becoming someone even you can finally trust. And that's the shift no one can reverse. This is the part no one taught you. Not in school, not in church, not in all those be yourself self-help books. This is the part where clarity becomes action, where silence becomes a weapon, where presence becomes control. You've done the inner work. You've buried the old identity, the one who overshared, overgave, overexplained. Now it's time to move different, not louder, but smarter. Let's begin with the rule Machiavelli made clear. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. In other words, your circle reflects your strategy, and your behavior sets the tone for every room you enter. So let's talk behavior. Let's talk movement. Because if you want to outsmart the world, you can't keep narrating your soul. First, stop narrating your life. You don't owe anyone your roadmap. You don't need to explain your every thought, decision, or withdrawal. Every time you narrate your next move, you hand people the tools to anticipate, intercept, and dismantle it. So stop broadcasting. Move in silence. Let your distance speak. Let your absence echo. Let your decisions arrive without announcement. Because confusion is a form of control. Second, use misdirection, not explanation. There's a unique power in being misunderstood when you choose it. When they ask for answers, give stillness. When they demand reasons, offer silence. Your unpredictability becomes their anxiety, and anxiety is how you reclaim the tempo. Don't overpower, outpace. Let them chase shadows while you execute in stillness. Third, use absence as a message. If you're always available, you stop being valuable. People don't treasure what they can touch on demand, they treasure what they might lose. So withdraw, not out of spite, but out of strategy. Let your silence become a pattern breaker. Let it unsettle the room. Let it create space that forces others to confront what they took for granted. When you disappear without warning, they don't forget. They rethink. Fourth, interrupt their pattern of control. They will test you, guilt, nostalgia, victimhood, because they're used to you bending, to you explaining, to you fixing. Don't bite. Don't justify your new silence with old explanations. Just don't respond. Your lack of reaction is the disruption. And when their old pattern stops working, they either evolve or exit. Both are wins. Fifth, be deliberate with your presence. Don't show up where you're not respected. Don't speak just to be polite. Don't give just to be remembered. Let your absence build mystery. Let your presence command pause. Let your silence say, I do not chase. I do not beg. I do not repeat myself. When you walk into a room, let the temperature shift. Not because you force it, but because you no longer apologize for taking space. That's not arrogance, that's precision. And precision is what separates kings from pawns. This is how modern Machiavellian strategy works. It's not manipulation, it's positioning. It's emotional economics. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're controlling the lens through which you're perceived. You don't need to yell, you just need to become unreadable. Let them wonder. Let them misread. Let them spin narratives until they realize none of them reach you. That is control, and control's always quiet. If you've done this right, they'll say you've changed. They'll say you're colder. They'll say you're harder to reach. And they'll be right, because now you don't give access. You grant it strategically. You don't react, you calculate. You don't prove, you observe. You are no longer explaining your value to people who've already proven they couldn't see it. You are no longer bleeding for those who can't even bandage themselves. You are no longer playing the role. You're writing the frame, quietly, deliberately, without asking permission. They say you've changed, and you have, but not in the way they think. You didn't become cold, you became calculated. You didn't become distant, you became selective. You didn't become harsh, you became unavailable to chaos. This is what real power looks like. And it doesn't look the way you were told. It's not loud, it's not forceful. It doesn't argue to be heard. It simply stops explaining, stops proving, stops performing. The new you doesn't seek to fix the room. You set the temperature just by walking in. You don't ask for space. Your presence takes it. Because power isn't volume, it's gravity. It's the silence that makes others shift in their seat. It's the unreadable stillness that forces them to rethink their next word. They used to know how to move you, what to say, how to cry, how to apologize just enough, how to act broken so you'd patch the pieces again. But now you've gone off script. You no longer react on cue. You don't flinch at guilt. You don't rush in to rescue chaos. You've become the variable, the part of the equation they can no longer solve. And that's what they call selfish. That's what they call ego. But it's not ego. It's memory. It's data. It's the cost of wisdom. You are not punishing them. You are protecting you. Because here's what you finally realized. You don't owe love to those who abuse your softness. You don't owe kindness to people who only speak it when they want something. You don't owe access to those who show up empty-handed, expecting you to carry both of you. You are not the strong one anymore if strength means bleeding quietly. You are not the nice one anymore if niceness means tolerating disrespect for the sake of image. You are not the loyal one anymore if loyalty means abandoning yourself to stay in their story. You are the sovereign one. You come and go by choice. You speak when it matters. You love fully, but never blindly again. And here's the part that stings for them. You've stopped handing out explanations like candy. You've stopped performing transparency as currency. You've stopped making yourself small enough for them to feel big. Now you move like fog, seen but never fully grasped. present but untouchable. Because you've learned what Machiavelli knew all along. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. You are allowed to change, to outgrow the roles that once kept you useful, to abandon patterns that once made you survivable. Even if they don't like it, even if they feel betrayed, even if they say you're the villain now, because you know the truth. You were never loved for who you were. You were loved for how well you performed, for how much you tolerated, for how easily you bent. But that version of you is gone. The script is ash. The act is over. And what remains is presence, sharp, quiet, uncompromising. You don't owe them softness. You owe yourself sovereignty. You don't need to be visible to be powerful. You don't need to be liked to be respected. You don't need to be available to be remembered. Because the new face of power, it doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg to be seen. It disappears and forces the room to adjust. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood. You're not here to be chosen by those who never saw you. You're here to be sovereign. There is a kind of silence that isn't emptiness. It's ownership. There is a kind of stillness that doesn't mean apathy. It means you've stopped handing out access like apologies. You no longer explain your standards. You live them. You no longer negotiate your intuition. You trust it. You no longer plead for decency. You expect it quietly. And when it doesn't come, you leave. Not with drama, not with fire, but with something far more terrifying to those who relied on your predictability. You leave with absence. The gap where your emotional labor used to be, the silence where your constant explanations used to live, the stillness that used to ache for closure, now sealed by clarity. Let them talk. Let them name you cold. Let them say you changed. Let them call it ego. That's not your concern. Because the truth is simple. You were never seen for who you were. You were only valued for how easy you were to use, how predictable, how soft. But softness without protection is erosion. And you've been eroding quietly for years. Not anymore. You don't move to be followed. You don't speak to be praised. You don't stay just to be remembered. You move when it's time. You speak when it matters. You stay only where you are respected, in silence, not begged in chaos, and now they remember you. Not because you begged, not because you screamed, but because you stopped answering when your name became a summons instead of a welcome. That's power, and power doesn't roar. It vanishes and makes them feel the weight of your absence. So here we are, not in revenge, not in bitterness, but in clarity, not seeking domination, but returning to definition. You are no longer the mirror, no longer the fixer, no longer the performance. You are the one who watched the fire and chose to walk away without burning with it. You are the unshakable line, the untouchable stillness, the final word never spoken, but always felt. This is your declaration, not with banners, not with noise, but with presence. And now let the world adjust to your silence, the same way it never adjusted to your truth.